Voila.
Voila. Oh, yeah, dude. Let's do a fucking podcast, dude.
You're just like South African all of a
I
sudden.
watch Hobbs and Shaw.
Right.
And one of the main characters South African goes, yeah, dude, we're gonna go get the cars, dude. I'm like, could you not have just hired a South African guy?
Yeah.
It's clearly an American guy being like, oh, dude, I'm from South Africa. It's like, oh my god, are you good?
God, yeah.
Yeah, it's brutal. And 3, 2. Hey guys, welcome back to the Arthritis Podcast, official podcast of digital and creative media works, where each week we take some from pop culture and try to break it down to better understand it. My name is David.
Hello. My name is Ben.
Oh, we're back, baby. We had a week off last week because
we were dying.
Someone was very sick. It was
Yeah.
me this time. Everyone else has been sick recently, and I've been kind of cruising through, and I just got hammered last week. My body was like 3, 2,
all right,
1, done.
David's turn.
Yeah,
What are we going to give him now?
It was I drew the tarot card that was like, this boy gonna die for a week, which was good because it meant that I got to sit on the film we're covering this week for a little bit of time, which kind of gave me an opportunity to pause and reflect and try and decide if I actually think it's good. So,
Yeah,
I
it
don't
just
know.
meant that I was able to procrastinate watching the film.
It meant that Ben put it off
to
for
the
2
last
weeks.
moment,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. As always. Look, we're talking about all kind of films and games and TV that are kind of crafted specifically by one person at the moment. So this month is all about auteurs or people that kind of are presented as being auteurs. So we thought, why not go to the source of the well, talk about a Tarantino film, talk about
Yeah.
the first Tarantino film, because this week we're talking about the style of Reservoir Dogs.
The dogs in the reservoir.
This is the Tarantino
Did
film.
Timmy fall down the well?
No.
Reservoir dog?
He did. Timmy's in Tim Roth. He did. So Reservoir Dogs obviously is a 1992 American crime film written and directed by Quentin Tarantino in his feature-length film debut. He basically used the money that he made on his previous 2 scripts to fund this, pitched it to a bunch of people, managed to get enough money, and then didn't use most of it.
Right, because
Just kind of interesting.
there's like 2 sets in this entire film.
There's 2 sets. I think they only paid for one of them. I have some like fun trivia for a lot of this film. Where it's just like, it was a weird production because
Yeah.
they were trying to cut costs for no reason, even though we had a bunch of money.
I can imagine that half of those sets are probably just abandoned.
Oh, like a lot of it was just like stuff they could find that friends they knew owned. Like it was that kind of
Right.
thing. It was very much like an independent film. It's obviously like it's one of the I think it's the highest rated independent film on Rotten Tomatoes at the moment.
Technically independent.
Well, it is independent. It was his, and then Pulp Fiction was obviously studio because that was then Miramax bought. It's a long story, but like the TLDR is that it's revered as one of the best films of all time by a lot of people.
Right.
It launched Tarantino's career as a kind of auteur director.
Yeah.
Pulp Fiction was the follow up, which obviously solidified that. Before we get into the summary, what did you think? Like, okay, obviously everyone talks about this as being one of the greatest films of all time, but what did you think going back to it?
Sure.
Because I don't know, I've got some mixed feelings, man.
No, I mean, it's okay. it's
Right?
Yeah, I don't think it's. I don't know. It's a good film. I enjoyed it.
Starts rough though, doesn't it?
Uh
That first scene is so dense when they're talking about tipping and then they're talking about the meaning of.
I think that's
Like a
fine.
virgin.
That's very like.
It's very
I don't-
Tarantino.
It's very Tarantino. He starts all his films like that. He starts all his films in like a diner, to be honest. At least the ones set in sort of like recently modern times.
It's yeah.
I think it's an okay film. It's a fairly simple premise, and it's very much just a character drama. Like you say, it's a crime film. It's not really a crime film.
There are people that do crime.
Well, it's a heist film. It's the interesting parts of a heist film without
The heist.
the heist.
Yeah.
And while a lot of people will say that the heist is the interesting part, that stems from like Ocean's 11 being a really good film. Usually the most interesting part is what happens after. And this is just like, what if that's the whole film?
What's like the before and after, like the build up and then the end.
Only like not even much of a before. You see a bit of
I mean, we see how all the characters get hired into the job, I guess. But,
vaguely. You see how most of them get hired.
but that would be like the first act of the heist film. It's just out of sequence, I guess.
Yeah, but you don't have that. You don't have as much density given to the.
There's no like heist planning, I guess, is
Yeah.
what you mean. Like there's no, they don't set aside any time to be like, this is how they plan the heist.
Yeah, they show it a little bit, but it's brief and it's more just to, I don't know, like develop the characters rather than to develop the heist itself. Like there's no real effort put into the heist. It's
not
pretty.
the focus,
It's literally just like, even they like describe it as just like a really just walk in, zero You know, like zero
They
resistance.
rob a
They're
bank.
all no, they rob like a diamond place. They steal a diamond.
Yeah, but it's from a bank, I assume.
No, it's from a
Oh, like from
I
a
think
diamond depository?
yeah, it's from like a
Right.
diamond seller. Which is, and they're like, yeah, they're insured up the arse, so like they'll just give it to you. They shouldn't have any resistance.
Right. That's that whole that
Yeah.
conversation about which weirdly enough is part of a conversation that is had in Pulp Fiction. A lot of weird Tarantino crossover. But let's get through the summary. I just wanted to say, like, going back to this time, I saw this so my dad's a big Tarantino fan, so I saw a lot of his work at an age that was probably far too young. I saw Tarantino's work and The Matrix at an age that most people should not see those films at. And it's why I'm the person I am now. And a big part of Reservoir Dogs when I was a kid is I didn't really get it. Like, I understood what was happening, but I didn't get what made it good. And coming back to it now, I do.
Yeah, I think the first time I watched this, I didn't really get it either. But yeah, coming back a second time, I think there's like films that make this film easier to watch in the sense that, you know, you see other films which sort of will take things from this and you build like that language on like an easier palette, and then you come back to this, which is just a bit raw and a bit coarse.
When you get to things like Pulp Fiction, Tarantino's found his voice in a very kind of clear, succinct way.
Right.
This is very much like unfiltered, like just raw,
a bit
kind of
pretentious.
It's a little pretentious. Like, I don't know. It's less funny. So I don't know. It's coming back to it this time was a bit tough, but I definitely enjoyed it. We'll kind of get to some of my more complex thoughts after the summary. Let's just jump into the summary because it's a little complicated and try to keep it as simple as possible, even though not much happens. 8 men eat breakfast at a Los Angeles diner before they carry out a diamond heist. Mob boss Joe Cabot and his son and underboss, nice guy Eddie Cabot, are responsible for planning the job. Everyone else uses aliases: Mr. Blonde, Mr. Blue, Mr. Brown, Mr. Orange, Mr. Pink, and Mr. White. After the heist, White flees with Orange, who was shot during the escape. At one of Joe's warehouses, White and Orange rendezvous with Pink, who believes the job was a setup and the police were waiting for them. White informs him that Brown is dead, Blue and Blonde are missing, and Blonde murdered several civilians during the heist. White is furious that Joe, his old friend, would employ such a psychopath. Pink confides he's hidden the diamonds somewhere nearby. He argues with White over whether or not they should get medical attention for Orange before Blonde arrives with a kidnapped policeman, Marvin Nash. Sometime earlier, Blonde meets Joe and recruits him for the heist. In the present, White and Pink beat Nash for information. Eddie arrives and orders them to retrieve the diamonds and ditch the getaway cars, leaving Blonde in charge of Nash and Orange. Nash denies any knowledge whatsoever of the heist, but Blonde ignores him and resumes the torture, cutting off Nash's ear and attempting to set him on fire before being shot dead by Orange, who then reveals to Nash he is an undercover police officer. The story now flashes back to Orange, real name Freddy, and his infiltration into the crew of thieves. The story follows him as he uses an incredibly elaborate tale of a drug delivery gone wrong to gain acceptance and befriends Mr. White, who takes Orange under his wing as a veteran thief. When Eddie, Pink, and White return, Orange tries to convince them that Blonde planned to kill them all and steal the diamonds. Eddie impulsively kills Nash and accuses Orange of lying, since Blonde was loyal to his father. Joe then arrives with news that the police have killed Blue. He's about to execute Orange, whom he suspects is the traitor, but White intervenes and holds Joe at gunpoint, asserting wrongly that Orange is not the cop. Eddie aims at White, creating a Mexican standoff. All three fire, both Cabots are killed, and White and Orange are hit. Pink, the only uninjured person, takes the diamonds and flees. As White cradles the dying Orange in his arms, Pink can be heard being arrested by the police, and Orange confesses he is an undercover officer. White sobs and presses his gun to Orange's forehead. Police storm the warehouse and order White to drop his gun before we cut to black and hear gunshots. Credits. It's not much happens, but it's very dense.
In the Mexican standoff, doesn't Pink shoot? Does Pink shoot? What's his name?
White holds Joe at gunpoint.
Yeah.
Eddie aims at White, which creates the Mexican standoff because Orange also has his gun out, I think.
Who's Orange aiming at?
I think Orange.
Eddie then? Because Eddie's the only one that doesn't have a gun.
Yeah, Orange is aiming at Eddie.
Okay, must be. And then
because
then
everyone
Pink
gets
comes out, like Pink just crawls out from underneath the ramp.
Well, he's not doing any. Yeah, he just gets it. He just leaves.
Yeah, I don't think he would shoot Eddie.
Honestly, fair enough. I'm pretty sure Orange shoots Eddie because my understanding is that maybe he shoots Joe because Joe's the only one that he needs to not get away. I don't know. It doesn't matter.
White shoots Joe.
White shoots Joe. That's right. Yeah. But again, like
welcome to this film. That's like a 1 second thing as well. It's just
so
like,
quick. Well, this whole film is it's just these punchy, quick, like 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And like I think if you blink, I think this is probably why I didn't get it as a kid.
Blink and you miss it. Yeah.
It requires so much attention to the dialogue and what's going on. I think like unlike Pulp Fiction, where the conversations are just like
padding.
They're just dudes talking while other things are happening, and they're really clever and intelligent and funny, but they're not really like intrinsically related to the story. A lot of it's just other conversations. Whereas I think with Reservoir Dogs, it's very much everything is about the heist at all times, except for that opening diner sequence. So I think if you don't pay attention, it's just like I looked away for 2 minutes to check my phone, and I looked back and I was like, I have to rewind because I missed, like, they're in a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
It's just so dense, and I guess probably due to the runtime, it's pretty short. It's like an hour and a half.
It's an hour and a half, which is like pretty short for Tarantino.
I guess for me, when we're talking about auteurs and like Tarantino in particular, a lot of the things that became trademarks, you can kind of see starting to develop in this.
Yeah, we've got the boot shot.
The boot shot.
The boot shot's in there.
There's no women's feet in this, so that hasn't made its way in yet. That's a Pulp Fiction. But I mean, like, obviously one of the things that is big in his filmmaking is like concealing like a really big crucial event and just not showing it. So like the bank heist in this, the boxing match in Pulp Fiction, the incident that goes wrong in The Hateful Eight, like all those kinds of things. And while originally not showing the heist in the script was budgetary, Tarantino said since, quote, I always liked the idea of never seeing it, and I kept that. Although it's not exactly Rashomon, you do get a sense of the characters' different perspectives when they talk about what happened. For the first half of the picture, you wonder if you'll ever see the heist. In the second half, you realize the movie is about other things. End quote. One of the things I wonder about rewatching it is, what is the film about? Like, you know, when you watch other Tarantino films, like Pulp Fiction, I mean, it's a touchstone because it's his big film after that, right?
Yeah.
Even like Kill Bill is about like revenge, ostensibly. Pulp
Fiction,
Fiction,
like a genre bash.
it's a genre, and it's great. Like Django is also about like kind of revenge, but like Southern profiteering and like blaxploitation, those kinds of things. Reservoir Dogs, like I don't know what it's trying to say. One of my big questions that I have is he's obscuring this heist, and it's just this kind of low budget, cool crime, clever thing where everyone dies at the end. Like, what's it even about? Do you know what I mean? There's like,
I feel like it is. It's kind of just like a screen test. Like it's like a demo reel,
right?
And you know, like the actors in it are all, I wouldn't say well known, but they're all good actors. Especially what's Mr. Pink. He obviously goes on and does things, but like even just, you know, the decision to not give them any names and just call them, like, you know, by their aliases. Mm-hmm. You never find, well, at least for a few of them, most of them, you don't find their actual names. Mm-hmm. It just seems like he was just like, I just want to have just these characters kind of bash heads with each other based on like this situation that you never actually see. For me, it's very similar to 12 Angry Men. 12 Angry Men is this, I want to say like 50s, maybe earlier.
I think it's late 50s. Isn't it?
Late 50s film about, it's based on a stage play, or at least there have been stage plays done on it. And it's 12 guys who are on a jury to convict this like young Latino kid, it's implied he's like Mexican, of like murder. And the idea is that they have to get like a unanimous decision on like whether guilty or not guilty, because that's like how the law works, or how like a jury works. The premise is that one guy doesn't believe he's guilty. He doesn't think he's not guilty, but he just doesn't believe he's guilty.
Doubt,
and everyone else is just like, let's just call him, let's just do it guilty and get out of here. But they, you know, they go to a vote, and it's like, all right, 11 of us think he's guilty and one of us thinks he's not guilty. And the whole film is
him convincing everyone else.
Well, not him convincing everyone else, but them just going through the motions. And like the film, like early in the film, when they do the first vote and one of them says, I don't think he's guilty, it's just like, let's sit down and talk about it. That's all they do. For the rest of the film, they just sit down and talk about it. And slowly over time, they all realize, you know, it's not 100% that he's guilty, so I'm going to say not guilty. And that's like the progression throughout the film. For me with this, it's a similar thing where it's just like, it's this group of characters in a room. Some of them aren't there, some of them are. There's been some incident that has preceded them.
And they know that one of them's a snake.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's just like one of them's a cop.
Same conceit as Hateful Eight, actually.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to dovetail, I guess, your thought there. It's interesting that he started his career this way, went huge and big budget with Django Unchained and like all these big, and then was like, okay, let's do something simple again. Bunch of dudes in a room, 8 guys in a room, one of them.
I think Hateful Eight is a bit more contrived. Like for me,
Definitely.
Reservoir Dogs is so simple. Like it immediately tells you like the stakes and immediately sets up sort of these characters. And I think the breakfast scene is really important for that, even though it's like completely just random and like a lot of people kind of consider it as just like
Tarantino proving a point.
Yeah,
like,
it's,
I can
you know,
write
it's
the
like
dialogue.
it's the and you know the fact that Tarantino was in it and then his character is immediately killed off. You're just like, he just wanted to give himself a cameo. It's just like, yeah, but the breakfast scene is pretty important because it means you're not just thrust immediately into this random fucking warehouse with a dude bleeding out. You're just like, oh, that's a bit weird. It's like it actually gives you a bit of like a standing point.
Yeah, and it also means that you've seen all the faces. Like, okay, so it means you've seen all the faces of both the robbers and Joe.
Yeah.
Like it means that when people start arriving, you go, I kind of vaguely remember them.
Yeah, 12 Angry Men actually starts the same way, where it starts out with them sitting in the jurors section of the courthouse, and then they move into the room.
Which is interesting you mentioned that, because one of the things that Tarantino does, and we'll get to it in a bit, is the main thing he's good at is referencing and using it to kind of synthesize something new. But I guess touching on your earlier point, like there is something very rustic about this, where it does have like a lot of his kind of the start of his trademark stylistic features. One of the things in this that took a lot of people off guard is the violence. Looking at it now, like...
It's just so much fun, Jan!
Oh my god.
Sorry, that's a deep cut reference.
Fuck. Well, looking at it now, though, like, it didn't surprise me that much, because, you know, like, obviously violence now is very different. Like, I played Ninja Gaiden, this is, like, small fry. But there is something, like, awkward and kind of not like when you watch The Walking Dead, for instance, that is a brutal show to watch because the violence is just very visceral. But there's something awkwardly non-staged about the violence in this, where like the ear cutting scene in particular caused a lot of viewers at the time to actually leave the film. Similar to what you experienced in Alien, was it? Which was with
Prometheus.
Prometheus.
Except the problem with Prometheus, they show it happening. In this one, they pan away and you just see his gross ear for the rest of the film.
But at the time, that was a lot for people. This
at
was
the time,
90s,
yeah.
remember?
But I think this is a case of like nowadays, the violence in this film is like it's still pretty like rough and like still like heavy, but it's almost a bit. I don't know. It's kind of like how Kill Bill is also very violent, but it's just kind of really jokey.
Well,
someone's arm gets cut off, and it's like a fucking sprinkler.
But I guess the difference would be that in that it's trying to be those kind of wushu films. I guess with this, it's not emulating anything. It's just him being like, I did a violent scene that was trying to have an impact. For me, at least, the thing that really drove it home was that Kirk Boltz, who plays the cop, he ad-libbed the line, I've got a little kid at home. He added that just like during one of the takes. And as you know with Tarantino, he keeps a lot of the whiffs in where people like start different lines and like then they fuck it up and they keep going. So like a classic one that everyone points to is in Pulp Fiction when John Travolta crashes the car into the front of his drug friend's house and he starts to start a sentence where he's like, I've got his wife, and then he fucks it up and he just starts again. They keep that whiff in because it adds like to the scene.
Yeah.
Whatever. But I mean, that's like an ad lib. That's a cool ad lib line that just makes that scene really drive home. And in 1992, in a Seattle Times article, John Hartle was talking to Tarantino about this kind of thing and the fact that people were walking out and if he was bothered by it. Because as a filmmaker, you obviously want people to see your whole film.
He would not be bothered
so
by
Tarantino
it.
said, quote, for some people, the violence or the rudeness is a mountain they can't climb. That's okay. It's not their cup of tea. But I am affecting them. I want that scene to be disturbing. End quote. And I guess if we're talking about like violence as a kind of prevailing theme in Tarantino's work, which it kind of is.
Absolutely.
Like to the point where it's like, and I guess like awkward violence too, like the fact that Vincent Vega gets like killed on like coming out of a toilet in Pulp Fiction. Like there's a lot of violence in these films that are just. They don't really, it's not Hollywood violence, it's just like kind of violence in weird places to weird people, you know?
Yeah, well, like Orange gets shot just by a lady in a car.
Just like some...
He just gets shot. Like, it's and when Pink's running away from the cops, which is one of the funniest scenes in this entire film.
It's incredible.
Just that crazy, like, tracked pan with him like sprinting down the street, and they somehow got this camera following him. They must have just had a dude in a car holding this camera as steady as possible.
I've never seen someone genuinely look like they're sprinting on film.
Oh yeah,
before.
it's insane. Yeah,
because like in films, it's like Tom Cruise doing a run, but that's a guy just like being like, I don't want to die.
Just hoofing it. Yeah. And like
incredible.
He just gets away scot-free because it's just like he doesn't get shot.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's the kind of, and there's really like, and when he's in the car, like at the start of the film, when he's just like in the car just like squirming and putting and like fucking screaming for his life.
Just Tim Roth belly.
Yeah, and you realize later on that that's kind of him putting it on to kind of, he's just like, all right, I've been shot. Let's like try to use this as a way to get more information out of this guy. And he's just putting blood everywhere.
Which really works in hindsight.
Yeah.
At the time, I think it's a scene that I was thinking about this when I watched it this time. If I watched the diner scene, then I saw Tim Roth doing that acting in the backseat of a car, I would not have watched the rest of this film if it wasn't Tarantino. It's so good, like, and I love it in hindsight now, but like, man, that would put me off so much if someone was like, watch it, you'll love it. I'm like, that's when I turn it off.
Like, no, I'm good.
Him doing a bad American accent, pretending to bleed out in the car, like, fuck, it's funny. Yeah, you mentioned before that Tarantino was like full of references to the point where it's kind of obnoxious. I've just got a quick list here. Some of them from Reservoir Dogs, some of them from elsewhere, and we'll kind of talk about what we think he does with them.
Sure.
So, like, the most obvious one that everyone is aware of is The Bride in Kill Bill wears Bruce Lee's yellow tracksuit, which, like, yeah, obvious reference. Some of the coolest stuff that I love in Pulp Fiction as well is You'll Be a Woman now plays as Mia Wallace prepares to do Vince Vega's cocaine, which is a signal to the audience that they're both about to go through this huge traumatic experience. The one that's really fucked up in this film is Stuck in the Middle with You, which plays during the torture scene as diegetic music, but it's weirdly metatextual. So there's two layers to that. Well, there's like more than two layers, but the two layers that I picked out was it literally describes what's going on in the scene. So Blonde is torturing Marvin Nash, and Marvin Nash can't get away.
Yeah.
But then it also literally describes the effect Tarantino is imparting to the audience, where they're stuck in this fucking warehouse in real time, suffering with these men in the room they can't seem to get out of. You know when you're like, it's just a cool, like it works on like both levels.
It's also very American Psycho, despite coming out before American Psycho.
It does have that vibe to it, doesn't it?
When it started happening, I was just like, this is just American Psycho. I mean, came out before American Psycho.
You know what the book
Tarantino doesn't
just
read.
before
Tarantino
he doesn't read.
He doesn't read books.
He does
watches
music and films.
He watches films.
A lot of music. So
a lot of films.
he does a lot with films and music in particular, and he has a lot of really obscure references that kind of form a lot of the foundation for how he constructs his films. The code names in this film are lifted wholesale from 1974's taking of Pelham 123. Like literally wholesale, like one for one from that film, which I love. I love that he doesn't give a shit. He's like, yeah, whatever, I'm gonna just use it. Just a quick list of other references in Reservoir Dogs. Marlon Brando, Charles Bronson, Donald Trump, City on Fire, The Great Escape, Do the Right Thing, The Lost Boys, The Thing, Silver Surfer, Breathless, True Romance, Honey West, The DeFranco Family, and Straw Dogs. That's not all of them. Those are just the big ones that I picked up.
Wow.
Everything he does is like intertextual. And it's one thing that he's really good at that a lot of directors suck eggs at. I think the trick with him is that all of his references layer onto each other to not be like call-outs. You know how like sometimes when you watch a film and they have a reference in there, they're like, this is a reference to...
Well, it's like there was recently, I Hate Everything's YouTube, he put out a video about the like the epic movie and like the disaster movie and date movie.
That weird period where everything had to have a parody
those like parody movies. Yeah, like those, like the references in those films are so fucking painful. Where it's just like, hey, do you know Britney Spears? And you're like, yeah, I guess. It's like, remember when she shaved her head? Like, yeah, I guess. It's like, have you seen 300? You're like, yeah, I guess.
Like I did.
Like whenever a reaction to a reference is like, yeah, I guess. It's probably not a good reference.
So what is it about the way that Tarantino does it you think that works? Is it just the denseness of them that like, because I think you could watch the whole of Reservoir Dogs, not know any of the references and still enjoy it. Yeah,
I think that's part of it. And like with probably like the most egregious one is the Kill Bill Bruce Lee outfit. And I think with that, because it's not like she, she doesn't like flip through she's not like flipping through a wardrobe and then like sees like the fucking the yellow and black outfit and goes, haha, I'm not gonna wear that one today, and then just keeps
turns
going.
Up in Japan wearing it.
She just rocks up wearing it. You're just like, isn't that? Yeah, okay, whatever. You're like, whatever.
I suppose combined with like
with the genre bash of it,
it's everything about it that, and you go, okay, well, it's a kung fu film. But it's
a Western.
Sorry,
that one's a Western.
Well,
the first one's a Western set in Japan. The second one's a kung fu film set in America.
Which is awesome. I guess too, like, and I'm gonna talk about the show that we try not to talk about.
Oh no, it's happening.
It makes people angry. But I guess aside from Tarantino and maybe David Fincher, one of the people who is an actual I guess next to Tarantino, I put them on kind of the same shelf. Tarantino, Fincher, and probably Dan Harmon are three people who can use this kind of intertextuality and reference, not as a cool call-out reference, but to actually layer and do something with the text they're working with. So in particular, I'm thinking of Community, where if you haven't watched Community, at least the first 2 seasons, every episode and gag is like somehow like a reference to a TV show or a film or like music or something, but it uses it to like synthesize some new meaning. Or do something or parody, but it never feels like you're watching a show that's going, look at all the TV and movies I've watched. It feels like you're watching a show that goes, isn't Star Wars really weird and dumb and sexist? Or you're watching a show, but then it also progresses the characters.
There's like a few dumb jokes in Community, which I think just come from the fact that it's more modern. Like the Beetlejuice joke.
Right.
Is pretty, that's just like a straight call out, like, remember Beetlejuice?
But then some episodes in particular, like the paintball episodes all use a different film genre as their like kind of contextual layer.
Yeah.
So like the first one is like Hunger Games, the second one is like a Western, spaghetti Western, and then the part 2 of that is like Star Wars. Like they do something interesting with it, and they use it to actually progress the characters and the ideas in the show, not just to be references. Which brings me to Rick and Morty.
No!
I know.
We had such a good streak going of not mentioning that fucking TV show.
The reason I mention it is that I think it genuinely does this well. It's Harmon at his best, where it's non-stop references that are so layered on layered on layered on layered that a lot of the time, like, you can't even identify the original reference. One of the obvious examples that I always point to is like the Council of Ricks. So they have that interdimensional Council of Ricks.
Yeah,
that's a reference to the Fantastic Four's interdimensional.
Jesus fucking Christ.
To the Fantastic Four, to the Council of Mr. Fantastic, where like because he's the smartest man in the universe theoretically, they form this kind of autocratic government, and it's one of those things where like Reed Richards, who is Mr. Fantastic, like he's so morally righteous that they form this intergalactic kind of cross-dimensional government,
right?
And the Reed that we follow in the canonical stories is sort of, he's the least consequentialist. So everyone else is like, we got to do things for the good of everyone, but our Reed is like, I only do things that are
It's
like
literally Rick and
that are
Morty.
only good. Well, Rick and Morty's the inverse, so it's like Rick is the most chaotic neutral.
Right? Yeah.
So it's just like references like that you don't need to know that to enjoy it.
Fucking chaotic neutral.
But when you do know that, it adds a layer of like more, not cleverness, but you get more meaning, or there's more. You pick up on more jokes, so like there's something to it that actually does something else. And that's not true though of so many writers. Like I was thinking of J.J. Abrams when I was writing this. So he did The Force Awakens, the Star Wars film, which was universally praised for being this cool, like, Star Wars for a next generation. It brings all this stuff into a modern context. As opposed to, like, Rian Johnson's Last Jedi, which was criticized for taking all that stuff and doing something new with it. You either, if you're going to be this intertextual person, you either have to do something dull and retread ground, or you do something new that everyone hates. It seems like the happy middle is no one. Like, I mean, I guess, like, maybe Star Trek 2009, which was a soft reboot, but also everyone really liked. The point I'm trying to get to is that when you are this intertextual and this referential, like Tarantino is in a lot of his films, and like Reservoir Dogs is subtextually, if you don't have a point to doing it, so like, you know, when J.J. Abrams did it, it was like a nostalgia trip. When Rian Johnson did it, I guess he was trying to prove a point. I don't know. Unless you have a reason to do it, it either sucks and is bad and boring, or everyone hates it. But somehow Tarantino escapes that curve with the way he does it, and I'm really worried that that's an art that's being lost, where unless you know, I mean, when we watched 8th Grade and that referenced Rick and Morty, it wasn't referencing Rick and Morty for the sake of Rick and Morty, it was referencing it for a current TV show.
Yeah, and as like the cultural, it was more of like a cultural thing where you were just like, okay, it places it somewhere. It's not just like, well, do you know Rick and Morty?
I guess I'm worried that
Pickle Rick.
a lot of references are like that now. We're like, do you guys know about this? Do you remember this? And you're like, yeah, we do.
Well, I think with when you have sort of just like textual reference, whether it be like sort of like a style, or like, you know, even like something as small as like a costume, or like even just like a musical motif. I think musical motifs are like probably one of the most kind of like underrated reference kind of bits and bobs. Probably one of the weirdest references I've kind of picked up on is this monster in Monster Hunter. Yes, I play Monster Hunter these days. There's this monster in Monster Hunter where
you've changed a lot in the last few months. You play Ubisoft games and Monster Hunter.
You'll be like doing your thing and it'll just randomly appear and you fuck your shit up. Like that's what the monster does. And the music that plays when it attacks you is like very reminiscent, or at least it uses a similar synth and has a similar chord progression to the original Godzilla theme, which makes sense because they're both Japanese properties. But it's such a subtle thing where I'm just like, oh, I see what they're doing, because this monster that like randomly just comes in and fucks your shit up. Like it's like always just like all of a sudden, and always just like, oh, my card's full.
Your card's full?
My card's full.
I deleted my card, not your card.
Oh, whoops.
Oh yeah, your card is really full.
Yeah, well, it would be because it said it was full.
It's weird that we give it away that it's full. That's why I need Pat.
I'm just gonna try to not forget what I was talking about. You want to resync the camera? Cool. So this monster just comes in and fucks your shit up, and it, you know, all the monsters in that game fuck your shit up. It's kind of how the game works. But the fact that they were like, all right, we're gonna give this monster, and it's very different. Like everyone's like, oh, the music for this monster is so good, it's so unique, and I'm like, Well, it's the only one that has like it specifically starts with the blaring brass going to the bah, 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 bah. Like not the same tune, but like, you know, it's like if you have a tuba going, it's like the Jaws theme where it's like you can riff the Jaws theme without playing the Jaws theme and people will be like, oh, this is a rip on the Jaws theme. Yeah. But it's not like a rip off. It's enough of a reference from like, oh, that's actually kind of cool. Like it's a nice subtle nod to the fact, you know, this is like a Japanese made game. And they're like, oh, we're going to nod to like one of the OG Japanese monsters. And I think Tarantino does that, especially with Kill Bill. Like that, like the Bruce Lee outfit is such just like a, like for, like that's just like, you know, Tarantino just likes Bruce Lee films. Because he's a fucking nerd.
He's like, how cool is this? You guys remember this shit?
Yeah, so he's just like, I'm not gonna reference it, I'm just gonna put her in it. I'm just gonna fucking do it. Yeah, you can't stop me.
He's like, I like samurai swords. Fuck it. Like it's that reverence to the material, I think, that helps, where it's not, he is such a genuine fan of the stuff he references. Yeah. It's not like, that's kind of why I think the Rick and Morty stuff works too, is that they're clearly nerds about this stuff, where they're like, they're not just passingly being like, hey, do you guys know the Fantastic Four? They're going, how cool is that, you know, Council of Reed Richards thing?
It's like such a cool concept. Let's
riff on it.
Yeah,
let's go into the writer's room and fuck around with it. I think that there has to be a deference to the source material that you're actually referencing. That means that when you put it into your work, it synthesizes a new meaning. Otherwise, you are just pointing to something and saying, hey,
remember that?
Hey, remember this? And that's, I think, what a lot of, not to be like, TV's bad now, whatever. I think that's like what a lot of people do now. And I think they think, and maybe it's social media's fault, I don't know, but I think people think that's like humor or meaning or context now, is if you can just point to something and say, hey, remember, that's somehow, I don't know, people think that's like clever or interesting or smart now, because that's just what social media has reduced that kind of referential material to. Like people post SpongeBob memes and they're like, remember SpongeBob? But it doesn't add or do anything to the context of the culture.
Which is ironic, given that SpongeBob itself does actually have a lot of referential stuff in it, which is really good.
That's kind of what I mean, though.
Yeah.
Same with like Toy Story, where like you watch those original Toy Story films, particularly the first two, and they are so referential.
Yeah, but it's like they're good. Like they're not sort of like in your face.
They're good on their own merits, and the references add meaning to the work that already exists. It's not just doing it for the sake of doing it. I think maybe that's why I find Tarantino so appealing as a storyteller, but I mean, Pulp Fiction is a great example where it's so densely layered with references, but they all create and add meaning to the point where it's almost like if you don't know any of the things they're referencing. So if you were younger and you watched a Tarantino, like particularly Pulp Fiction, you watch that now, it's almost like not knowing any of those references, it'd be like it exists in like a fantasy world that isn't our own. Like it's almost like it's world building, but on the real world.
It's like watching older Simpsons as well.
That's a really good reference
I would
point.
Get that a lot as a kid, where like watching The Simpsons, there'd be some jokes, like some jokes would go over your head just because they were a bit too smart, but sometimes jokes will go over your head because they're referencing something that you're just not. Yeah, it's just not your generation. Right. You're just too young for it.
But it could be The Simpsons, or it could be something that is in our world.
Yeah.
And that's what I love, is when the references are so interwoven with the world building that you can't delineate between the two. So if you don't get the reference, you can attribute it to being part of the story.
Yeah, but then like you've got The Simpsons now, where a lot of people attribute the fact that it's bad to just like the modernization of its referential humor, where it'll have episodes with Lady Gaga, and you're like, it's like Lady Gaga's in this episode, and you're like, it's a bit weird.
Do you think that's why Tarantino's immune to that criticism? Because he doesn't make films set in the modern day? Like his new one that's coming out is set in like the 70s in Hollywood. Like
he's just staying just far in
he's staying in his wheelhouse, right?
Right, yeah.
Which is like when he grew up in the stuff he loves. I think maybe that's the real trick.
Well, I think like we're gonna slowly come to a point where like Tarantino just doesn't really go past the year 2000. Ever.
That's the shit he knows.
Yeah, because he's such a goddamn film nerd for films before. He
has a very specific
before he started making films
and music. Like his whole referential kind of touchstone is like that stuff. So I wonder if that's why he's so hesitant to like work with people like Marvel or like work on big properties. He's talked about it before, where he's like, I just don't get the modern zeitgeist. Like my thing was this time period. I'm gonna stick with that, and I'm gonna keep improving and keep doing my thing. But that's kind of where he lands. So I wonder if that's not related as well. If he kind of like immunizes himself against that sort of criticism by just. Like, he's not going to become the new Simpsons because he's not trying to then...
Stay up to date.
Stay current, because he doesn't need to. Yeah. You know, he's not making films for, 16, 18-year-olds. He's making films for 35, 50-year-olds. Like, that's his target demo now.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
he's sort of doing that thing where sort of like Harry Potter did it, where it sort of moved and shifted with the audience started with it. It's like Tarantino kind of just always he's always pulling in new people. Like as soon as people get old enough to watch Tarantino films, people tend to get into Tarantino films. He's not shifting down, like he's not moving to where the money is.
No.
He's kind of just staying where he is and going, yeah, they'll grow up. Right. They'll get old enough.
They'll get it eventually.
Yeah.
which is kind of cool. And you know, sure, he is dense and he is in some ways intellectual. I don't think that he's like the. I don't think that he's. Well, while he is an auteur, I don't think that he sort of has this reverence of like intellectuality that some people kind of try and apply to him.
I think similar to what we talked about last time. Like he's, you know, if you're doing a film with Tarantino, you yourself, regardless of your previous experience, would probably start just kind of towing the line. Definitely. Not towing the line, or sort of, you know, you wouldn't butt heads with Tarantino. You'd be like, what do you know? You're not Tarantino. Right. So it's you know, he's able to put his vision forward without too much like pushback. Definitely.
And I think that's maybe that's part of, I mean, we'll talk about it in the post show, but I think it's part of what makes him so interesting in a modern age where so many films are written by committee. He's just this weird like outlier in the whole process, and I find him deeply fascinating. But yeah, I think Reservoir Dogs is a weird symptom of the way his career started. And I'm kind of interested to see his latest film and see how that played out, because Hateful Eight was very weird and different.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see this one, which looks totally different again. So we're going to cover it next week, but hopefully it gives us something really interesting to talk about, because I think always when I come out of his films, regardless of anything else, I'm always thinking about them deeply. Yeah. And that's not something you can say for every director or every writer. Do you have any recommendations for this week?
Shit. I've been listening to bloody Rich Brian's new album, The
Sailor.
Good,
The Sailor?
So good.
It's so good.
So good.
It's such an album.
Got that shit on repeat, which doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, it's really rare for you, because I do that all the time, but it's such an album.
I think by the time this goes up, King Giz, their new album will be out. It comes out tomorrow for us.
This is going
in the present.
Next week.
Yeah, it'll already be out. Yeah. And I'm going to preemptively say that I'm going to be listening to that on repeat. So
I love it.
Yeah.
Speaking of repeat, I've been replaying Dark Souls 3. I'm up to the final boss again.
Yeah.
Eldritch. No, I haven't even started DLC yet. That's a fucking hard game, man.
Yeah.
I'm also replaying New Vegas, and I'm rewatching Star Trek Next Generation. I live in the past, ladies and gentlemen. That can't be a surprise to anyone.
Yeah.
I've also been bumping the new Rich Brian album, and Horror Show have a new single out. Eyes Closed. It's chill as hell.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
And it's a little nostalgia trip. You know, if you're feeling a little bit lonely and you're feeling like maybe you don't have as many friends as you used to, give that one a bump in your car late at night. It's going to do you some good. As the Patreons will know, hopefully by the time this goes up, Aaron and I are working on a project at the moment, a video project. And if you are a Patreon, then be sure to let me know what you think of the kind of rough outline. It's going to be wild. I'll tell you about it after, but we got some dumb ideas. Talk about it in the post show.
Yeah, classic David not telling me things before we start.
We didn't have time before we started. Where can people find us?
Facebook.
At Dcm.Works.
YouTube.
YouTube.com/Dcm.Works.
Twitter.
At Dcm_Works.
Patreon.
Patreon.com/Dcm.Works. Currently the only place to get the post show. We don't
live stream.
We haven't yet
because
we haven't yet reorganized our set to facilitate live streaming again. It's coming. Adam's on my ass about it, so it's going to happen. Patreon.com/DCM.Works starts at $3 a month. You get access to over 60 plus hours of behind the scenes content, early access to kind of the weird video projects we're working on. You get behind the scenes on those projects. Things like, you know, if we got some videos coming up with interviews with people, we're going to post the full interviews there, not just kind of the ones that fit into the videos. We're thinking like dev diaries as we go through videos as well. Adam and I have a few coming up as well. So like, it's just kind of the best place to support us. You get extra content. We view it more as a subscription than like a donation. So you can go there and check us out. Otherwise, we have a Discord server now. There's a link in the show notes to join it. You can find out what we're going to cover the next week if we haven't talked about it in the show. We ask feedback, comments, ideas from you guys. We cover in the post show. Also, it's just a good place to hang out, get some music recommendations.
Yeah.
And just chill, you know?
Share some memes.
Share some spice memes.
Share some memes
We don't do a lot of memes.
But when we do.
They're good ones.
Very good.
It's also a good place to just hear my stream of consciousness as I slowly become unraveled.
As he screams into the void.
Yeah, hoping someone will listen. No one ever does. Otherwise, if you want to follow us individually, I'm at DCM.
I'm at Literal Citrus.
We'll see you guys next week.